Thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to call our meeting back to order. And now we will proceed to our interview of Mrs. Kohanski. Welcome, and thank you for being here today. Where's Mrs. Sobel? We need to change the nameplate.
Oh,
Oh, she's hiding us.
so lucky to have a name tag, Mrs. Sobel. No worries. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And again, welcome. Following the interview questions, you will have an opportunity to make some concluding remarks. All board members will be asking questions today in a round-robin format. We have had the opportunity to review your resume in detail. And again, just for our online audience, please, if you would like to make any comments, the best way is going to be to email them directly to me. You can find those on our district webpage. Then go to Board of Education tab, and then you will find that there. And again, so we will start with, I will start with the first question. Please tell us how your experience and qualifications have prepared you to be the next superintendent of Walled Lake Consolidated Schools.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Titus. I just want to take a moment to say good evening, Board of Education members, and thank you, sincere thank you for the opportunity to interview for Superintendent of Schools here in Walled Lake. I know many of you know me, and you have known me for the last few years since I've been part of the team here in Walled Lake, but what you might not know is that I have 25 years of experience outside of Walled Lake in other top-performing districts in the county in leadership roles, and I've also worked in smaller districts throughout Oakland County. So I have a unique perspective between large systems as well as small systems and what it takes to be a leader in both of those. As you can see, you have my resume in front of you. So tonight I didn't want to just go through and reiterate my resume. You already have that, and you can see that. But what I really want to do today is talk to you about my why. A lot of people, it's kind of a thing now. People, want to share their why. What's their purpose? What's their passion? What drives them in what they do? And for me, it's what drives me as an educator. So I'd like to just share a short story with you and how it led me to this moment here tonight to sit in front of you in this interview. I grew up the youngest of 4 children, and I worked in a family-run business when I was growing up. My dad had a tool and die machine shop, small foundry, and it was a lot of hard work. As kids, we grew up working after school hours and weekends and summers, and little did my military dad know that he was preparing me for a life in public school administration, because that is what life is like. It's a lot of after school, a lot of evenings, and a lot of weekends. And so my mom took care of the office side of the business and did that for many years. And when I was in junior high and high school, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and she ultimately passed away when I was a sophomore in college. So for my dad, that was a really difficult thing. Remember, I'm the youngest, and so I took time immediately following my mom's death to really spend time with my dad and help out in the office where I could. So I was working on things like invoicing and billing, and then very soon after my mom had passed, one of the workers from the back of the shop came up to the front office, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Your mom used to help me." And he had his mail in his hand. And I took a look, and I thought, oh my gosh. And he said, "Can you read through this? can you tell me what are bills that I need to pay and what are other things that I need to pay attention to? And it really hit me right then and there that this man, who was a loyal and dependable, wonderful worker for our business, for my father's business, was not functionally literate. And my mom had been helping him for years, and here he was, standing in front of a 19-year-old girl, asking her to read his mail and help him. And it was right there that this fire ignited inside me, and I knew that I wanted to help others, that was my life's work, and that was really truly my destiny. I wanted to help people find their success in life, help them to be successful, contributing members to society, no matter what that looked like. And so that really drove me. And my why really hasn't changed. It's driven me as an educator, and my passion is really to help all students find their passion and their path in life, regardless of what that means, whether that's an academic future, a future in the trades, a future in the military, a future in career, or just a future in life, whatever that brings them. In my work, I found passion for having a broader impact and also wanting to lead schools, make a change, lead positive climate and culture so that everyone contributed towards that why, that passion that I have for helping others to succeed. You know, I've led change initiatives at the district level. I've managed huge budgets. I've led my own building in my previous district through a multi-million-dollar renovation through the bond that was passed. And along the way, I've hired quality staff. I've mentored them. I've coached them. I've given them constructive feedback, and at times I've had to have difficult conversations with them too, and that's one of the hardest things as an administrator. I've led staff through celebrations, and I've led them through tragic loss. And I think back to the time, it was the very first week of school. It was a post-Labor Day start, and the week prior, one of our teachers passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And I also had my dad in intensive care, and I was having to make an end-of-life decision for him at the end of the week, all while welcoming kindergartners for their first day of school. So, I'm no stranger to leading through difficult and challenging times. I'm no stranger to keeping a positive face and to being out there publicly promoting students, promoting student achievement, and taking care of others. So I look forward to this time with you tonight. I look forward to sharing more about my skill set and more about my valuable experiences through my 28-year career as a servant in public ed. And I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Vice President Mr. Siegler, and then we will proceed in order from there. Mr. Siegler?
Good evening. Please share an example of a time you've led a sustained multi-year improvement initiative. Be specific regarding the situation, the task at hand, your specific role, and the outcome.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've really been very fortunate to be involved in a multi-year initiative here in Walled Lake the last several years. When I joined the team here, realizing that one of my big tasks at hand was to create a multi-tiered system of supports for all of our students. And you've seen, I know, updates from me throughout the last several years on that. And for short, we call it MTSS. But really, in a nutshell, it's just how do we develop a comprehensive system for supporting all students. And one of the things that's really difficult about that is changing mindset. For many years, and it's not unique just to Walled Lake, it's been true in other districts in which I've worked, but there's a mindset that's often, if a child's struggling, then they must need support and help elsewhere. But the mindset shift is, if a child is struggling and needs support, the onus is on us to figure out how to best help them. But there has to be a system, a universal system put in place for us to do that, and that's exactly what I've led the last 3 years. We took a look at some data. It's really interesting. Over the last 10 years, as we've seen a decline in revenue and we've seen a decline in the ways that we've been able to support students, we've also seen an increase in special education certification. So we sit at about 16%, and the county average is at around 11%. So it makes you wonder and make a hypothesis about why is our average so much higher. Could it be that without that system of supports in place, that we're over-identifying students and that possibly that earlier intervention could really help us. It could help us in the long run and help students be more successful in the classroom. That's really the goal of an MTSS system, is to help students find success in the classroom. And when I talk about providing supports, it's providing supports through building teacher capacity so that they have the tools that they need to really impact students right in their classrooms. One of the other pieces of data that came out of our work with MTSS was the need for it to be a general education focused process. And I talked about that mindset shift, that oftentimes it's been seen to run through like a special ed process. So the implementation of our instructional specialists was data that came from that MTSS process. The committee, the broad committee of stakeholders we put together here for working on that plan, was really looking at the fact that we needed someone to facilitate that was not part of our special services staff. So the instructional specialists that were created last year and implemented this year, and I was very proud to give that board presentation in June, sharing with you the success of those 12 individuals in that program. But really one of the vital pieces was their involvement in running the MTSS process at the building and facilitating that. So this team, this committee, we use that data to make some really important system decisions. And then we worked with our state and county supports to help us with that. We developed handbooks, and then I implemented with my team a kickoff training for our elementary principals and MTSS staff and teams in September. Went through a comprehensive training of the new process. Then in January, did a check-in. How's it going? Give me feedback so that my team and I can help you. And then visited buildings in May, all the time giving principals that process so that they knew. And in May, I want to come out and talk to teams so that they can provide feedback to me, and then we can see what we need to do to be more successful for 22-23. And really the proof of good success with this is looking at our data. And our iReady data at elementary is looking fantastic. As you've seen, I gave you a number of pieces of data looking at our end-of-year reports in June, and then I even gave you another update on what our iReady data looks like. And our elementary students are really growing, and it really is because we have that system of supports in place. And they're supporting all learners. It's really going to translate well, and this year I'm excited we're rolling out our secondary process, and I anticipate the same kinds of increases in achievement.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Secretary Mr. Peterson.
Tell us about your experiences maintaining a focus on student learning while also managing a district that is in declining both in enrollment and in revenues.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? And I know that Walled Lake's not a unique example of that. We're no stranger to dealing with this, and I've dealt with this in other districts in which I've worked too, declining enrollment, declining sources of revenue. And in Walled Lake, it started around 2011-12. Districts across the state are dealing with decreased birth rates. We're dealing with movement, obviously in the Rust Belt here in Michigan, and then in local communities. The strains on our families are really difficult. So we find families leaving, but we also find that families are deciding to stay in this community long after their children graduate, which means they love it here, and it is. It's a great place to live and raise your families. Since joining Walled Lake, I've been part of cutting nearly $8.5 million additional dollars out of the budget, and while simultaneously keeping an eye on student achievement. We've demonstrated growth this year, and we're finally back to some pre-pandemic student achievement levels, which is great. But I think when you're dealing with declining revenues and declining enrollment, you really have to get creative in your planning. And that's one of the things that I did last year with creating the instructional specialists. We took a look at how we could creatively use several grants and braid those grant funds together to support instructional specialists at all 12 elementaries. And I've also been very instrumental in using ESSER funding very creatively. Our community's been great. They gave us great feedback in a stakeholder survey this year. My team and I worked very closely with Mrs. Less on how we can best use ESSER money, and there's a lot of strings attached to that, things that are earmarked for learning loss, earmarked just for before and after school programs, earmarked for summer schools. But all of that planning has gone through me as part of that larger system of supports that we talk about. So I've gotten creative in using multiple funding sources, even while our general fund is taking a hit. I've been creative in finding ways to preserve things that complement and contribute to the health of our overall system. So, in light of that, in light of declining enrollment and decreasing revenues, I've been very proud of how we've been able to keep our focus on student achievement.
Thank you very much. Our next question will be from Treasurer Mrs. Kaplan.
Using specific examples, please tell us how you maintain visibility and accessibility to the board, staff, parents, and community groups. How would you ensure this happens as our next superintendent?
Yes, thank you for that. In really thinking about that, the life of a school administrator doesn't end when the kids go home. Neither does the life of a school teacher either. I've lived that life as well. But the life of any good school leader doesn't end when the kids leave. And, in my close to 15 years working in leadership, in administration, my evenings, my weekends, well into the evening and very early morning hours are spent really working closely with all stakeholders, and it's been that way for a number of years. Throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to work really closely with local charities, partnerships with fire and police. In my previous district, I was very fortunate that right next to my building was the Oakland County Sheriff's Substation, and I got to know the sheriff, the sergeant there very well as the members of the team. And it was really beneficial to me to have that visibility with them and for them to be in our schools. And I know we have that same kind of wonderful partnership with the 9 municipalities and law enforcement here. I've worked countless hours with our PTAs to support students in classroom needs and even out of classroom needs. And Walled Lake is also very well known for having extra supportive PTAs and very active and involved PTSA councils. So those are, I think, are ways that you get out there and you have those visibilities. In my prior district, one of the things that I did as a leader was really looked at our family-owned businesses within our community and enhanced those and promoted those. And it was really a beneficial partnership, and our families that own small businesses really appreciated that. In my last 3 years of work on the Early Childhood Center development, so taking that from visioning and design to construction to completion that we just saw at last week's ribbon cutting. It was a wonderful ceremony and so proud of that. I worked along the way with our neighbors at Fox Run community right across the street and answered lots of their questions. I'm on a first-name basis with a number of them, and the wonderful community members there are looking forward to partnering with us, but had some concerns along the way. So maintaining that visibility out in the community with them was very important. I've worked closely with Easter Seals, bringing supports, much needed supports, especially throughout the pandemic and post-pandemic, in supporting our students. And I'm also someone who has very close relationships with staff at our local colleges and universities. So those are just some examples of my visibility within the community. And then what about visibility here in the district? Well, I'm present and visible throughout our buildings for instructional walkthroughs, for drop-in visits, to stop in and see how programs are running, attending events regularly. I think that's very important. I had a funny story that I was reflecting on when I thought about this. I was running Chromebook distribution after hours last year around this time, and I had a couple of students come in with their parents, and I think their mom was with them, and they said, "Oh my gosh, it's the lady from the Zoom videos." It's a really interesting way to get recognized, but for the last few years, maintaining that visibility, even in a digital world, was really important to me, and I was honored to be able to shepherd that work and to be there to support our families during that time. I think it's also important that you talk, but listen more than you talk. And I'm the type of person that welcomes all kinds of feedback, positive and negative, because I think you have to hear all perspectives in order to find common ground and to grow. So as superintendent, I would assure you, I will continue to grow relationships with all stakeholders within this community, and I will be highly visible and present throughout the schools and our community.
Thank you. Our next question is from trustee Mrs. Dunn.
Tell us about a challenge you've experienced in bringing a diverse group of people to consensus on a difficult issue. How did you provide leadership, and what was the final outcome?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a firm believer in that you can have differing opinions, but you can also find common ground, and especially when you maintain a focus on students. One of the difficult challenges, and it's even a little bit painful and challenging to think back on, but I'll take us back to March of 2020. Are you guys okay going back there with me? I was in charge of the team that led our pivot from in-person learning to virtual learning in 2 days. So you can imagine that challenge. I was in a conference room here with the team, and it kind of felt like we were mapping out a military strategy of sorts. We had things up all over the whiteboards in the conference room, and really trying to think about making decisions that put students at the heart of the learning, and then taking care of people. I mean, as teachers, as a former teacher, classroom teacher myself, thinking about shifting what we do in person in front of our kids every day to something that's virtual and abstract and not tangible was a really difficult mind shift for me. And here I was leading this team over a 2-day period in order for us to get ready and planning teacher professional development so that they felt prepared and getting information to families and communicating that out. Certainly a very challenging time. But in the summer of 2020, to talk about bringing a diverse group of people together to try to coalesce around an idea was the Return to Learn plan that was required of us to complete. And we used the governor's plan as a framework, which we were required to do. And everyone on that group, on that large stakeholder group with community members and of course our representatives here at staff and administration and employees, everyone had differing opinions about what we should be doing. And it became a real challenge. We tried to continually refine and identify what our goals and our common goals were. And I kept that team focused on what we could do within the guidelines that we were provided. So we didn't just have license to do whatever. And that was really difficult, as some people on the committee wanted something that we just couldn't give within the guidelines. So I think that education piece and that talking and bringing people on board really was helpful. We ended up forming some small subcommittees, you may remember. We focused on academics, we focused on health and safety, and then we focused on well-being. And those were the 3 pillars of that Return to Learn plan. And, I heard good and bad feedback on it. Honestly, it was our first pandemic, right? And hopefully not having another one anytime very soon. But working really hard to be honest and transparent and coalesce around those ideas about putting students first was really what helped us to come together, even with differing opinions. It's really just continually monitoring it. We were really thankful that the plan that we implemented, while not perfect and definitely had drawbacks, there were many sleepless nights on my part thinking about the execution of those plans, but really closely monitoring how our staff was doing, how our families were doing, fielding personal phone calls from families who were struggling with it, and I was struggling with it too. But like I said, it's challenging to lead through everyone's first pandemic. I hope not to have to repeat that anytime soon. But if we keep students as our focus, I think you can bring differing opinions together.
Thank you. Our next question will be from trustee Ms. Van Leeuwen.
Please explain opportunities you have had working and collaborating in diverse, multicultural, and inclusive settings.
Yeah, thank you for that. I am proud and honored for a 28-year career so far in public education that's given me the opportunity to work in many diverse settings. And you might say, well, what does diverse mean? Some people define it in a very narrow lens, but really in education, diversity is defined in multiple ways. You could be diverse in your economic status. You could be diverse in your ethnicity and culture, diverse in race, diverse in language, diverse in ability. And so those are all things that I've really been fortunate throughout my career to have opportunities to work in districts that mirror all of that. My first classroom job, I taught in a very high-performing place where there was about 50% English learners and about 40% low-income students. And so that was a joyful, amazing learning experience for me. And when I was transferred, because of, in those days, there were seniority rules about when you were a young teacher and getting moved around, I was there for a few years teaching, and when I was leaving, I literally was in tears with my teaching team and my administrator, because it was just such a joyful place to work and celebrating students of such varied backgrounds. I've been a leader in a small district as well, where socioeconomic status was really an opportunity for us to look at and how we overcame that. My school had about 30% free and reduced lunch. And I've also been a leader in large districts. I implemented the very first inclusive preschool environment in my former district, and that was a real joy, where we brought students with typical abilities and students with non-typical abilities together in one classroom with a co-teaching model. So highly successful. Our parents loved it. And that was a focus that I brought here in developing our early childhood center. I wanted to ensure with the team that planned that, the fabulous team of early educators and leaders, that planning that to make that an inclusive environment so that children of all abilities can celebrate and grow and learn together. That's just been a real joy. I've met with student groups to gain perspectives on curriculum and how it affects them personally based on their backgrounds. And I've looked at new intervention models for our students at middle school and high school, and those are being implemented this year. So I'm very excited. I've partnered closely with special services here in the district to train teachers in accommodations for students, for all students. So my background, I'm really proud to have served in all of the districts that I've had the pleasure, and they've all been beautifully diverse, and I find that Walled Lake is no different. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to serve here too.
Thank you. Our next question will be from trustee Mrs. Casagrande.
Let you get your waters. I'm
Thank
finishing
you.
my notes. Ms. Kohanski, can you please describe how you have engaged and affirmed all staff members, and please provide examples?
Absolutely. So I'm a relationship-focused person, if you can't tell after having gotten to know me. But I also believe that there are two main jobs in any district, and this is not something that we all haven't heard before, at least I don't think so, but there are those who directly work with children, and then there are those who support those who work with children, and that's it. So no matter what job role you have, it's important to be affirmed, and it's important to be validated. We just came off a wonderful welcome back with our staff today, and we had all employee groups. Everyone from across this district was welcomed, and it was great to be able to spend time affirming them. From a personal standpoint, it's vital to climate, culture, and success. And throughout my career, I've really been pleased, especially in my former leadership roles, to celebrate everyone that's part of that, whether they're working directly with students or supporting our students. And that goes everywhere from my custodial staff, bus drivers, paraprofessionals, food service, secretaries, you name it. It's important to affirm others. But I think that affirmation really has to be grounded in relationships. It's not just to say, like, great job. to have a personal investment in those who work with you in support of children is really important. I think back to a story. I was as a building leader. I'm going to take just a moment to go back and reflect on that time. I had the largest bus group in the district at elementary. I had 13 buses that picked my students up and the kids and got them to and from school every day. And I made it a point to get out there and talk to my drivers, get to know them. And one particular year, the third driver in line was someone that was new. So about 10 minutes before dismissal, I climbed on and introduced myself, and he told me his name was Dennis. I said, "Hey, Dennis, how's it going?" And I said, "What brought you to driving for us?" And he said, "Well," he says, "I retired." He says, "and I really, really wanted to give back. I wanted to serve, the community." I said, "Well, what did you do before you retired?" He says, "I was a police officer." I said, "Oh my gosh." And he said, "And let me tell you, this is the hardest job I've ever had." And it really was. And so Dennis and I had a chance to have a really great relationship and really help him to hone his skills. Even as a bus driver, it was probably the most challenging. I mean, I've led an entire school. I've taught lower elementary. I've run assemblies with 500 to 600 kids in them. And yes, I would agree with him that driving the bus is probably one of the most difficult and challenging jobs in our district. But aside from all of that, whether you're looking at those who work directly with our students or those who support those, as a leader in each of my districts, I've made it a priority. Now, in a district the size of Walled Lake, it is difficult. You have to be visible. You have to be present. You have to be forming relationships with people so that when you do affirm and you do send that, it's genuine. It doesn't just sound like lip service. So as superintendent, I'll continue to lead in this way. I believe that we lift ourselves up when we lift up others.
Thank you. I have the next question. How do you go about making decisions on controversial issues? And please give an example of a controversial issue you have experienced.
So it's very rare to make a decision about a controversial issue that satisfies everybody. So there will always be a group that doesn't agree, and that's okay. That's totally fine. I think when you're leading in and making decisions about things that are controversial, it's important to be as open, honest, and transparent with all stakeholders. I think back to issue that we had. 2020 was quite a year, but I will take us back for just a moment to October of 2020. October 11th, actually, 10th to be specific, but in this case, I'll start the story on October 11th. We had been cyber attacked by an international ransomware attack. And October 11th, I'll remember it because it was my daughter's birthday, I spent Sunday on the phone with the FBI. What a thing to do on a Sunday, especially when it's your daughter's birthday. Yes, I spent Sunday on the phone with the FBI. And it was really a controversial piece in that there was a lot of uncertainty about what had happened. There was, it was on the news quite quickly. Everyone knew about it. And yet we were still working with cybersecurity organizations, the FBI, legal counsel. Were trying to dig in to see what kinds of information was actually taken. And it took us months. As you may remember, it took months. I spent hours after school on the phone, hours with the weekends, still continuing to work with the cybersecurity folks and the FBI. And it's really difficult because I think in controversial issues like that, people were saying, what's been taken? Has my personal information been taken? And we just didn't have that data in an expedient kind of way. It was taking a long time to be able to share that. And so that's where the difficulty came in being as transparent as we could, because there was a really long time during that event where we just weren't sure. We were waiting to get that information so that we could share it. And we were able to recover and restore our systems. As you know, it took a while, but we were able to offer credit monitoring for anyone that was affected. And I think it's just be as open and honest as you can in real time. take feedback from everyone, whether that be positive or negative, and then really do your best with that stakeholder input and that feedback just to ensure that the decision that you're making is the most sound one that you can be making in that moment.
Thank you. Our next question is from Vice President, Mr. Siegler.
Describe your knowledge and experience in using data to make informed decisions.
Did you say data,
Yes, I
Mr.
did.
Siegler? How much time do we have? So as you know, I'm the keeper, the watcher, and the sharer of all things data when it comes to our district, and proud and happy to be able to do that, and have been a very close shepherd of that over the last several years, especially as we've gone through the pandemic and now are emerging from that. So I want to talk a little bit about some big ideas about data. So, and then I'll share a specific example. So I share this with all of you, but I've also shared this a number of times with our community members, our parents, our teachers. It's important to use multiple points of data when you're making a decision, if it's available and if you can. It's also important to ensure that the data that you're using is reliable and it's valid. So those are two really key points that I always keep in mind when working with teams, that you want to make sure it's reliable and it's valid, and that you have as many points of data as you possibly can. All of the work that I do in Walled Lake here is related to data-driven decision making. From the very granular level of a teacher who's using data to help inform maybe a small group phonics instruction, right? We're taking a look at our screeners that are coming from iReady and helping that teacher to know how to form a small group and what things to teach so that we can impact student achievement right there in real time in that moment. All the way up to what's not working within our system and what data is showing us that. So I've had the opportunity to make data-driven decisions from that granular level all the way up to the system level. Data also needs to be very easily accessible to people. Throughout my career and working in leadership, and even working when I was a classroom teacher and a literacy specialist, if you don't have your data organized and easily accessible, it's harder to make decisions. So one of the things that we did this year with our MTSS process was bring on EduClimber, which is a data warehouse so that you can look up data on a student, on their achievement, really quickly and get multiple data points on a student very quickly. So it helps create efficiency, it helps streamline efficiency in making decisions for students. And it's really, it's just important to allow staff those tools and resources that they need to make decisions and using data to make those informed decisions. So as superintendent, I would ensure that data is at the heart of any and every important decision that we make, and that I would be clear in my communication with all of you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Secretary Mr. Peterson.
What does an effective relationship between the board and superintendent look like, and how do you cultivate such a relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. I definitely will go back to something that I touched on in previous answers, and that's my relationship ability. I like to pride myself in saying that I have the ability to build strong relationships, to build honest and trusting relationships with those with which I've worked. And I think if you ask anyone that's worked with me, that they would share that sentiment with you. As superintendent, it would be my goal to work with you. While we have very different roles and we do very different things in our functions, we work together for the same common outcome, and that's success for all of our students. So our relationship will be a very strong one. Like I said, it would be built on time together, time getting to know one another, frequent communication, and those will really, I think, help us function within our individual roles. And no surprises, right? That's my mantra. I've been very transparent throughout my time in my current role, but as superintendent, keeping those structures in place to ensure that you have the information that you need so that there are no surprises, and that you're communicating with me what you need to know so that there are no surprises. You'll never, ever wonder with me as superintendent what we're working on and why we're doing it.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Treasurer Mrs. Kaplan.
How do you gain support for and educate the community about our schools, especially when faced with a controversial topic like redistricting or privatization?
Yes, thank you for that. Anytime you do anything, and I mean anything, whether it's controversial or not, you have to lead with being transparent and being honest and being open about it. And when things are controversial, it's even more important to ensure that you're doing that. As you go through any process, like something like a redistricting or a privatization, which I've lived in a number of my career paths where that's been a topic that's been tackled by the district, and it can be very difficult. As part of our role as leaders is we have to make difficult decisions sometimes. And I think I said it earlier that, when you're making decisions around controversial topics, you're not going to please everyone. And that makes it really hard. So I think involving people in the process is important, getting stakeholder input. And I think you have to be really thoughtful about the venues in which you provide opportunities for people to give you that feedback. So you need it to be in town hall meetings, you need it to be in digital format, you can take survey data. I think there's lots of ways that you can get feedback, and then be open, honest, and sharing about those issues and some of the data that's impacting those issues. I like to take, whenever there's an emotional topic, and emotion, can lead to controversy. Whenever there's emotional topics, I like to just look at data, because in many cases it can neutralize, doesn't always, but it can neutralize when you have emotions kind of running high around a topic. But I think if you're getting that feedback from stakeholders, good and bad, you're using data helping to inform and educate everybody around all the issues that are part of that topic. Being open and transparent and honest, and then making decisions and remembering to keep students at the heart of those decisions. Like I said before, I think you can differ in opinion and still find common ground. Doesn't make it easy, but I think you can definitely achieve that.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Trustee Mrs. Dunn.
Tell us what budget development process you use to gain broad support for the final result.
Yeah, so we have a really wonderful business office that works very hard on our budget process. And I've been very thankful in my partnership with Mrs. Less while I've been here and her team. We do frequent check-ins with one another, and I think I mentioned it in one of my prior answers that since I've been here in Walled Lake, I've been part of cutting about $8.5 million out of our budget. And part of that really involves those regular budget meetings. I know that you're familiar with the yearly cycle of the budgeting process and when we do that, but we don't just wait until that time of year to talk about that. So in my current role, in terms of overseeing our instructional services, I also oversee all state and federal grants. I've worked with Mrs. Less on overseeing those ESSER grants, the multiple ones, as well as the equalization grant that we recently were awarded this summer. All of that's been part of that very comprehensive budgeting process where we take a look at what our budgets look like, what our spending will be and what the projections are for that, and then being really, really tight about it. That's one thing that Mrs. Less and I do are frequent check-ins. I also frequently check in with my teams. I didn't mean to neglect mentioning information technology, but I also oversee that budget as well. So several really huge budgets here in the district are under my supervision, and it's really important to become also aware of the restrictions and what you can and can't do with some of those funding sources, and being really strategic about that and collaborative about that. So keeping those district goals as kind of our guidepost for what we're spending money on and what we're doing, using data to help us make informed decisions about should we invest in this or should we invest in that? What data points do we have that help us know what we should be doing? Looking for efficiencies in programs. I've partnered with special services too and looked at sharing costs and things that help us impact students in the classroom. And even though this year we have a record state budget, which we've not seen in decades, it's so important to be scrutinous over our budgets and to be very, very careful as we move the district forward over the next few years, because if we're not healthy, if we're not stable, if we don't keep that fund balance above 5%, that has very negative consequences for us. So while, yes, we're enjoying some great benefit from a very robust state budget, we still have to be very careful.
Thank you. Our next question will be from trustee Ms. Van Leeuwen.
It has been said that people either love or hate negotiations in the school community. Would you tell us where you fall on this spectrum and give us some examples of your negotiating experiences?
Yes, thank you. So on a personal and professional note, I believe collective bargaining is a vital and very important part of the process in order for us to maintain strong partnerships between our employees and our administration. So it's vital, it's necessary, it's very important. In one of my prior districts in which I served, I was part of a negotiations team. But really here, as part of cabinet, I've had a lot of influence in negotiations in terms of advocating for, suggesting contract language, and things that support our teachers and our students in the classroom. So my responsibility was to share those potential language changes with the negotiating team. In my previous roles, my union leadership at the building level in 10 years of building leadership, I never once had a grievance, I'm proud to say, and just had a really wonderful working relationship with my union leaders in my building. I believe here I have a very positive relationship with our current union leadership, and as the superintendent, just because I'm relationship focused, I would continue to focus on and build those relationships so that we work together to address issues, find common ground solutions together. It's important in a district this size that the superintendent stays informed, that the superintendent is kept in the loop on negotiations progress, and that I communicate with all of you the progress on how that's going. So that's definitely something that I would continue to lead in, and I would commit to being collaborative with not only our negotiations teams, but also sharing that information with you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from trustee Mrs. Casagrande.
Ms. Kohanski,
Yes.
what do you foresee as items the superintendent should do versus delegate versus lead? And please provide examples.
Yes. So I really firmly believe as a leader, as a public servant, that at any time you do whatever it takes, regardless of the situation. So I think there are some times where you have to delegate, sometimes where you have to lead, and sometimes where you just have to do. I think back when I was a building leader in a prior district, I had a custodian, my head custodian had to leave for an emergency at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and about 4 inches of snow started coming down at 3 o'clock, and the buses were coming at 3:15. So there's a picture to prove it, have about 3 inches of snow on this hair, was out shoveling sidewalks in the front. So I think there are times when you just must do, especially when it's important for safety and important for kids and stakeholders. But I also think it's important, though, to identify those things that you do. And as superintendent, you're the chief leader, you're the chief learner, you're the ambassador for the district. So there are things that you must do. And I think some of those things are setting high expectations and goals. and reaffirming those district goals and talking about them and being very explicit about those. And then I think being visible, we talked about that in one of the earlier questions, being present, being visible, allowing everybody to have time to talk with you, time for you to listen to them, attending events regularly, and just clear communication with you as the board. Those are those things the superintendent must do. And then what do you delegate? I think you delegate things that come easy to you, but are maybe in other people's wheelhouses because you want to encourage their growth and development. So, and certainly things that are in their wheelhouse that also might not be in mine. So asking budget questions of Mrs. Less, getting updates on our facilities and operations and bond work for Mr. Chatfield. So those are those kinds of things that I think you delegate out so that I can clearly communicate those with you. And you have to check in regularly with your teams. You just don't delegate and let it go and hope for the best. So that's part of that accountability process that you must have in place, is to check in regularly with teams. And then what would I lead? As superintendent, you talk the talk and you walk the walk. And I would commit to doing that, setting high expectations and goals. But I think you lead not only at the local level, but you need to be a leader at the state and at the national level. And so those would be things that I would definitely lead within this community and bring those things back to enhance and improve our district. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Vice President, Mr. Siegler.
Mrs. Kohanski, what unique skills or leverage could you bring to this position, and how will Walled Lake Consolidated Schools be served by this? Please provide examples of how you've leveraged these skills.
Yes, thank you for that. So it's been a real pleasure reflecting on my 28-year career, and not only reflecting on my leadership style, but what that brings to this job. So my style of leadership is transformational leadership. So what does that mean? It reminds me of just the last question that Mrs. Casagrande asked, that you really are, it's situational. So your leadership style matches the situation, but all of that has to be grounded in relationships. So sometimes you act as a servant leader. Sometimes you act as a relational leader. Sometimes, you act as whatever the situation is dictating at that time. And relationships are really at the heart of my style. I've leveraged and navigated through some really difficult times, as I've highlighted in not only my career before, but my current role here. Virtual learning is one example I can think of. Some people said I was crazy. Some people said you're way too positive about this. And it's my nature. I don't mean it to be, off-putting to anyone, but I'm just a very positive person in general. And so our staff was amazing during the pandemic. I affirmed them on a regular basis, or at least I hope they saw that I was doing that. It wasn't easy, but we did our very best to take care of kids. But leveraging those relationships that I had with staff and encouraging them helped get us through that. The cyber attack I mentioned earlier in one of my answers, in working with our IT staff, our small but mighty IT staff that really works their heart out for this district and supporting our families and supporting our staff and our students. When that cyber attack happened, I had to rely on relationships so that teachers knew we're going to get through this together, and we did. And then implementing the instructional specialists was another time where I really had to pull out and leverage relationships with folks in order to make that happen. I talked earlier about braiding some various funding sources from our grants to be able to make that a reality that protects that position from general fund cuts that we may have to make. I needed to take away some things that had been there for a while that people were used to having. But again, talking about data-driven decisions, looking and saying, this isn't showing me that this is working for kids. Is it showing you it's working for kids? And having really real discussions about that, and then making decisions and leveraging those relationships and telling everybody, this is going to be good for kids. And they said, we believe you. because that trusting, honest, and caring relationship that I've developed with so many stakeholders in the community, in our school community, really helped us, and it helped us support the whole system. So as superintendent, I would just continue to leverage my leadership style in forming relationships not only with our students and our staff, but with our administration, with you as the Board of Education, and also out in our community.
Thank you. As we wind down our time together, would you like to leave us with any closing remarks or thoughts?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Titus. I want to thank the Board of Education for this opportunity to come and share my experiences and my stories over my 28-year career as a public servant here in public education. It's really been a pleasure to have a profound impact on our students, on our staff, and our community. Since I've been here as assistant superintendent, I've had a number of very highly valuable experiences. Some of them amazing, some of them challenges, but with every challenge comes an opportunity, and I think I've taken that, and I think I've grown that, and I've definitely grown in my leadership journey. I think it's helped prepare me for this step, and my ability to build and maintain really strong relationships, I think, is at the heart of what I do and who I am. It would really be an honor to serve as superintendent of schools here in Walled Lake and to work with all of you so that we can support all learners. And that fire I talked about at the beginning with my story, what ignited me as a passionate educator, it's still there.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your interest in our superintendent position. The board is interviewing a number of candidates, and we will contact you if you are selected as a finalist. Thank you so much for coming. We've enjoyed meeting with you. And at this point, again, for our audience members, please, if you could, finish filling out your feedback forms, and then they can be turned in to Mr. Bennett or Mrs. Sovol if she's in the back there.